Twisted Remedies podcast. My guest today is Professor Kyle Mills. Kyle is the head instructor, owner at 607 Grappling in Binghamton, New York. He is a black belt under Professor Mike DeRocher, who is going to cringe because I just called him Professor again. So that'll be good for Mike to hear. Kyle has trained Krav Maga, Muay Thai, and Shokido combat jiu-jitsu. He was in the Air Force. We'll get into probably talking about some of that. Iraq vet. Also did some fundraising. He was a fundraising manager for Scleroderma in New York, one of the chapters over there, I believe. And previous on-air talent for some radio stations. So this is somebody who's not a stranger to talking. So I'm excited to maybe I'll pick up a few tricks along the way. So Kyle, welcome on the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that. We'll use that term talent very loosely here. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
Yeah.
So can you just walk me through what got you started in martial arts? What was your first, entry into that?
Yeah. So I was, when I was in high school, I was in a group called the Sheriff Explorers program. I don't know if they have those. I think it's a part of the Scouts. I'm not quite sure, but
Yep.
so I was with the sheriffs here in Broome County, and we would do, sometimes we would do fingerprinting and that type of stuff. But then there was one small segment that we did that was defensive tactics, and it was real basic stuff: some elbows, some knees, maybe a little headlock escape, something like that. And I really, really liked it. But I grew up kind of, we didn't have a lot of money when I grew up, so I didn't have an opportunity really to do much for martial arts. So I had gotten that taste of it then, and once I joined the Air Force, that's when that they had a lot of different opportunities that you didn't even really have to pay for a lot of them. That just within the military, it's these clubs. Um, and I started there was a small group that did Kali, knife fighting.
Yep.
Did that for a little while, but the club kind of people just deployed and left, and so from there I kind of segued that into Krav Maga in San Antonio. Did that for a while, and while I was doing that, it was still pretty old school. And in Krav Maga, particularly with the old school stuff, it's when you're on the ground, they like yell at you, "You're dead, you're dead," and I was like, I don't know if I really believe that, because I've been watching this UFC stuff, and
Right.
there's this thing called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and so once I got out of the Air Force, came back here to Binghamton, New York, and there was a couple of guys that were doing classes, and I started up then, and man, the rest is history. I really got hooked on it after pretty much my first class. I was like, this is what I really want to do, and been doing it ever since. 16 years now.
That's awesome. What was it that this is? So there, you've just kind of, that explanation is a very common theme that a lot of black belts that I've had on here talk about, and it's I tried other martial arts, but there was something about jiu-jitsu that got my attention. What do you think it was about jiu-jitsu that resonated?
Oh, that's a great question. I think my experience to that point had been pretty much Krav Maga specifically, and with that, it's very much you're kind of you're there for yourself, and it's very there's a lot of button heads. When you're the type of stuff that you're training, it's not that jujitsu really is, but it's not really a team thing. It's kind
Right.
of it can be brutal, but it's sort of just you against one other person, and you're remembering a couple of we're not going to call them forms because it's not really what they were, but basically you do this in a row, and it just felt too. I don't really know what the word is for it, but it felt very just too personal, too much with me. Whereas with jujitsu, it was maybe not the first class, but very, very soon after my original coach, he had kind of provided me with this concept that I've carried through the last 16 years is that you're not here for yourself. You're here for your training partners to make them better and to help them be safe. Um, and if you do that, if let's say there's 11 people in the class, you've got 10 people looking after you as compared to just one instead of just me.
Right.
And I've carried that through really throughout. And when I started my gym, and um, that's something that I've really tried to push out there is the main thing I really want to really convey or portray is this can be a friendly and welcoming environment. These are not people who are here. We're not here to hurt you, not on purpose anyway. We'll
Right.
learn ways to do that, but we're not, we're not trying
Right.
to. And it's much less about just making myself better. And I've kind of always tried to just help others. And that seemed like a way that I was making myself better, but in doing that, I was helping others and others were helping me. And it was a group effort.
Yeah, it sounds like the community was a big that community kind of feel and the training environment was missing from Krav Maga.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It was because it was a big school and you rarely saw the same person twice.
right, right. Did you find that I've heard from other people like the one of the downsides of the benefit of jujitsu and the downside to some other martial arts is like Krav Maga you can't really spar like 100% because you'll kill somebody. Like
Right.
it's a brutal art form. So
Mhm.
did was there a piece of that where you found that like you really get to test yourself with jujitsu because you're able to right up until the tap you're able to go full like
I think
a full
so.
spar. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I think that was a big part of it. And it was one of those where, and we all were, but ran spazzy white belt at that point. So, it was a lot more effort uh, put out at that point. And once I started seeing, once we started getting new students in, I was doing pretty well, even as a spazzy white belt. Um, and it's a little bit dissimilar to my limited experience to other martial arts in that you can almost feel yourself getting better every so often.
Yep.
Not every class, but every couple of months something will happen. You'll roll with somebody new, or you'll do something. You go, wow, I actually am getting better. Because it's easy to fall into. I'm sure as you know, and many others who train jujitsu, it's easy to fall into the whole, we'll call them blue belt blues, but you feel like you're not really getting better, but you really, really are. But what's the saying? A rising tide lifts all ships. So
Yeah.
everybody's raising together. And
Right.
so when somebody comes in that's new, you're like, oh wow, I actually am doing quite well. And it was it's not an addiction I have, but I would imagine like a gambling addiction where you got lose lose lose, but then you get that one win and you're like cool, reinvigorated, and
Right.
keep
Yep.
going.
Yep. Yeah, it's I tell people that are just starting out when they're just like, "Oh, I feel like, I'm not improving." And the analogy I use is I used to look at it like you're building a roadmap in your head. And right now you
Hmm.
only know the street you're on. You don't know where that street like when you start out, you don't know where that street goes. You don't know
Hmm.
what other things are there. And then eventually it's like, "Oh, you light up this other road." And then you realize, "Oh, those roads connect." And then,
Hmm.
3 years in you're like, "Oh my god, there's all these other places that I can go."
Right.
And I think it's like it's just it's a fascinating way that and then when you have
Hmm.
those revelations you're talking about, it's like, oh, okay, this is I'm actually I'm getting this. Those are
Hmm.
I think that's when you start to realize what you're starting to get a little more view of the map.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a lot more of those light bulb moments, and they were becoming more and more frequently the more I trained, and it was almost addictive. It was like I gotta get back there. I gotta do. I saw this thing randomly on the UFC fight this weekend that
Right.
back when they were only once a month or once every
Right.
couple of months. And you're like, oh, that's really cool. I got to try that. And so it was always something new where, I've got a very limited experience in it, but 3 years in Krav Maga, I must have covered the same exact thing easily 20 times over those 3 years.
Yeah.
Whereas I started at this location, this gym, almost 4 years ago now, and very rarely have I shown the same thing twice since I started here, because there's just so much. Exactly as you said, the roadmap. I've always kind of looked at it as learning the alphabet, and then small words, and then bigger words, and then
Yep.
sentences and paragraphs, and once you hit a certain level, you're learning things that are hard to teach, like metaphors, simile, poetry, that
Right.
that kind of thing. And it's seems to be never ending. I'm always learning something.
Yeah. Well, and the more comfortable you get, the more creative you can get with your writing. So that, yeah,
Right.
that's I like that's a good way
Yeah.
of looking at
Yeah.
that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The testing thing, I was reminded of, you said you'll roll with people and go, oh, I guess I am where I am. It was funny.
Hmm.
I went to a Globetrotters camp last week in Phoenix.
Hmm.
So I love those because you roll with whoever is there, and it's people you don't train with. You never met some of these people before, and for me, it's like it's a good, like I rolled with a bunch of other blue belts, and it was like, oh, okay, like some of that imposter
Right.
syndrome starts to creep into the back a little bit when you you
Hmm.
get, oh, I got some other perspective, and I guess I don't
Right.
suck as much as I thought. So those, I think those are, any chance to go out and do those kind of things, I think are beneficial. Once you've got like a good
Right.
foundation under you to just test yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And that imposter syndrome, I hate to tell you, but it never goes away.
I've heard that.
In many cases, the crown gets heavier and heavier, and it's, yeah, I feel, for me, as a now black belt, that, if I was to go to a Globetrotter camp, I think I'd do okay. But man, there are some times you run into these like competitive purple belts that you're like, wow, this guy's really giving me a hard time. So it
Yeah.
does help with the imposter syndrome to roll with other people that you're not used to in your own gym, that you've either learned together or taught. But yeah, it kind of gets, it's one of those things where the imposter syndrome is always there. Sometimes it's here, sometimes it's here. It just really depends on how you want to look at it, who you're rolling with, how things are going. Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I think I went up to Burlington last weekend, actually, or last week rather, and rolled at UFAI with some of their guys, and there were a couple times I was like, wow, this is okay, cool. I just did that, neat. I could pull that off because it's they're not my students, and so I
Right.
don't know their game.
Right.
But then there are other times where I'm surprised. Like I'll do something and go, wow, that was really slick. Can we work on that? That was really cool. And I feel like always a student, even though I'm the instructor here, always a student. I really enjoy being able to go up to UFAI or have Mike come down here and be the student, because I'll be the first to tell you I don't know everything there is, that nobody knows everything there is, but
Right.
it's there's so much to learn, and it's evolving so rapidly.
And I think that's unique to jujitsu also, is that humility piece that you had, like your ego just gets put in check early on, and either I
Right.
think when Gavin was on his episode, he was like, you're either going to survive that ego check and stay, or
Mm.
you can't and you leave. But if you stay, that humility that you get from, like, oh yeah, what was that, like, just that perspective, and I think that trickles out into real life outside of the gym too. And I think from my so far limited experience with jujitsu and just talking to a bunch of people, I think that is relatively unique to this art.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that it's just generally it's good to be it's great to be a confident person, but at the very least you've got to have some humility, some modesty.
Yeah.
um, And I think that, fortunately, I was put into a situation where when I was in the military, I was exposed to some real tough guys, some real badasses. So when I got out and I started doing this, I've always had the mindset of, oh, there's always somebody bigger and stronger and all that. But sometimes you see, I'd say 9 times out of 10, 9.5 times out of 10, people who train in jiu-jitsu, they're typically pretty humble, pretty modest, pretty, cool people, easy to get along with. But occasionally you'll find somebody who's not had a whole lot of adversity in their life, and they do this and they see themselves as a tough guy. And, you know, sometimes it's like, all right, well, all right, man, you don't really, okay, maybe do some of these Globetrotters events, or, do seminars, tournaments, that kind of thing, because you'll find out pretty quick.
Right.
It really humbles you. But at the same time, it's a weird, I don't know if double-edged sword is the right term, but it humbles you and makes you modest, but it also makes you confident.
Yes.
I think maybe because of that modesty,
Yep.
it kind of one feeds into the other in this kind of yin and yang sort of way.
Yeah, I've said that about the I've gone to 3 camps now, and the first
Hmm.
one I went to in Maine, there was like I think there was like 170 people there. We all live
Yeah.
in this site. They feed us there. You're basically just there for the week, and there's a lot
Hmm.
of there's a lot of people that are partying pretty heavily there, and that's part of the vibe. And I remember leaving thinking, if you put 170 other people, like from just some other group, in the
Right.
woods with that level of partying, so somebody's getting in a fight, somebody's going to the hospital, and I was just it struck me that, like, that's amazing that you can put that many people there. And I don't know if it's because
Hmm.
that confidence piece, the humility piece, everybody there trains, so it's like it was just such a cool thing to see. Like, there was not one hot-headed moment, not one speck of drama, and it's just like I think that is
Yeah.
telling for the community itself.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. And I'm sure you get enough of us jujitsu nerds together. There's going to be people rolling over here and rolling over there and learning things, but not actually fighting.
Right.
It's not. Typically the egos don't tend to get in the way of those types of things, even when you're drinking. But when you're drinking, sometimes people will get like, hey, can you show me that thing you saw, or oh, you're watching TV. What was that?
Right. Right.
But I do my best not to fall into that. I haven't for many, many years been one of those people, but yeah, you'll see that on occasion. But it's not. It's in a helpful way. It kind of
Right.
goes back to that whole thing of we're helping. Um, trying to show people, hey, here's this cool thing that I do, or why did you put your hand there? What is that? It really is. When I first started off, it was a game of inches, and then it becomes a game of half inches, and a game of quarter inches, and it just gets so much more precise with the little things that you learn from anybody if you're just willing to listen and kind of take it in.
Yeah, I've heard. I think Mike actually says this too, but I've heard this from a few people that once you get your black belt, it's not like you're basically starting over, and now you're learning everything through a very that probably that like quarter inch, eighth inch, whatever, 16th of an
Oh
inch
yeah,
lens.
100%.
Instead of just like what's an arm bar, it's like, okay, well, what if I mess with this? Like that's
Yeah.
so fascinating to me that throughout your entire journey, there's something to learn at every
Mhm.
level. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think, part of, so when I had gotten my black belt, you're supposed to give a little bit of speech. Maybe I talked too much, but part of, one of the things that I was saying that really even still holds true now is that, I spent 15 years looking up to these black belts and seeing them do what to me was viewed as magic, right? These guys what are they doing? This is magic. And now I'm in that space where I'm expected to be one of those people, and I don't realize as we're going through those years that I am able to do a lot of these things. And it was sort of, now that I've got my black belt, it's like, okay, it's now my job to be a magician. Like, how do I do that?
Right.
And it helps you to kind of realize that, that everything it was magic until it was understood. Then it was science. So now I'm viewing it more as a science as compared to what the heck was that? Maybe I'll be lucky enough to learn that someday. Now you're kind of looking at it through that different scope where it's okay, this is a science and I need to really, really, my notes need to be much more detailed. I need to really focus in on those quarter and eighth inch small little tweaks.
I like that. So it still looks like magic to everybody else, but when you get there, you realize it's
Right.
not magic, it's science. That's cool.
Hmm.
That's got t-shirt material written all over it.
Yeah. Just have magic on one side, science on the back. You're
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Um so obviously you deployed, you were in for a bit, and you and I talked before about kind of what you were doing.
Hmm.
I'm part of the goal of this is to get, more people who have kind of been through stuff into jujitsu, because I think it's helpful. Um,
Hmm.
is there something about jujitsu specifically that helps with that? All the stuff you bring from post service, is it like, do you find that there's like a, I don't know, for lack of a better word, a therapeutic component to it that kind of helps you with whatever stuff, whatever baggage you brought with you from serving?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think it's kind of one of those things where, so when I deployed, when I was in the Air Force, when I was here, CONUS, when I was, Garrison, I was an intel nerd. I was just an intel guy. I was an analyst. Um, I thought I was being smart when I joined because I was like, oh, intel, they're not going to deploy. They're going to stay behind the computer. Oh, no. No, when intel deploys, they deploy with the guys that don't really exist, the cool guys, that you see on TV. And so I was exposed to, as I had said before, those really tough guys. These guys, these operators are, next level. But I think what it does is it helps. So with your time in the military, particularly with a joint with a special operations type of group, um, you're living so close to the fire, living so close to the flame. It's tip of spear stuff that when you get out of the military, whether you've done that stuff or not, when you get out of the military, just in general, you feel like, okay, now what? This is civilian world. Now what do I do? And I think it does help a bit with that sort of, we call it maybe more of like a stress inoculation, where for so long you were here, you were living that close to the fire, and then you get out and you're a civilian. It's like I need something to reignite that sort of fire, that kind of make me feel like I'm doing something um, that's a little bit of um, a rush, an adrenaline rush kind of thing. But at the same time, I'm learning a lot. So it's we're what we're doing out here is more or less simulating murder,
Right.
um, but obviously it never gets that far. But it helps to know that I think maybe, when you're in the military and you deploy, they give you these things that, the rifles and you've got the armor, like the actual literal physical armor and firearms. And then you get out into the civilian world and you're like, I'm feeling a bit weak here. I'm feeling a bit exposed. What can I do to help kind of narrow that? Um, um, Maybe it's self-serving, make me personally feel like I'm still kind of tough, even though I'm no longer in the military. But yeah, I think it has a lot to do with um, just wanting to continue with that. Like I said, living close to the fire kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think aside from I think the structure, there's like a rank system, there's structure to it. I think when I've kind of pondered this before, I think that's an important part of it. But I think what you're talking about is that you get to maintain like some level of warrior, that you may like
Right.
if you leave the military and you were doing, really whatever you were doing, you're involved, and you have a mission. And I think jujitsu gives you that ability to test yourself and be a warrior to an extent, in a
Right.
in a completely safe environment that you
Mm-hmm.
otherwise, like especially where where you were and who you were with, that was
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily the safest environment. So
Mm-hmm.
I think there's something to that, the camaraderie piece and the just the getting to test yourself and go through that fire you're talking about. I think that's a big part of
Mm-hmm.
it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I got out of the military where I was an intelligence analyst with X, clearance, whatever it may be,
Yeah.
these things that I have up here that I'm not allowed to say. But
Right.
and then you get out as a civilian, and it's like I'm literally I'm working at a children's home and going to college. How does that compare to what I was just doing not even a few months ago? And there does still need to be a little bit of a keep the engine warm kind of
Yep.
thing. I feel like it helps me to feel safe, maybe safety is a big part of it.
Yeah. That makes sense. Did you
Yeah.
find that, so obviously with Intel, very analytical, um,
Mm.
do you find that that part of your brain, that analytical part that you had in the military, does that translate into your jujitsu? Do you kind of look at it with the same lens, or is it totally?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. 100%. 100%. So um, the head of our organization out in Los Angeles, Subconscious, Nick Gregoriades, I was listening to, this was years ago, maybe even 10 years ago now. He was on a podcast and he said something that has stuck with me for so long that really helps me as an instructor, but at the time helped me as a student too, is that he tends to view things through the lens of he uses the matrix of the ACT rule, ACT, attributes, conceptual knowledge, and technical knowledge. So at any given time, I'm looking, I'm seeing a person, but above their head, I'm seeing, you're strong as shit. Your attributes are here, you know. Conceptual knowledge when you roll, maybe it's not getting put together yet, but your technical knowledge maybe. And for me, I've always felt that I really tended to gravitate more towards that technical knowledge. I really want to learn everything in the most I guess the way I like to look at it is, somebody presents you with a frog and you're like, okay, that's a frog. It's an amphibian. It jumps, it eats bugs, cool. But when you take that frog and dissect it and really figure out what makes it tick and all that, that was really what appealed to me, I think from the beginning, was really, really focusing on that technical knowledge. Um, where admittedly, even today, 16 years later, my conceptual knowledge is probably the lowest bar on all of those because yes, I do roll a lot and all that, but the technical knowledge, if you ask me about a triangle, how do I do a triangle? It's do you want the short answer or the long answer? Because I can tell you, you know, you put your leg here, you do this, you squeeze. Cool. That's more of a conceptual knowledge thing. Or I can break it down into the full alphabet, 26 different steps. And you have to do A, then B, then C, and all the way through to Z. And that's really where what I really tried to focus on was, I think that analyst in me kind of comes out where I'm going, okay, cool, we just learned that, and I was always the guy going, teacher, I got a question, I was that guy.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that technical aspect of it, that analytical aspect, totally, 100%. I totally agree with that. I brought that with me through all the years I've been doing this.
Do you think that, so that ACT that Nick talked about,
Mm.
do you think there's a like a golden spot where each of those should be, or can like is there obviously you don't want one to be super deficient, but is there
Right.
a sliding scale of kind of what, where A should be, where C should be, where T should be?
Yeah, I think generally it's best to try and have all three of those things rise together. I feel like the attributes is a little bit of an outlier because you really can't have that too high. You
Hmm.
really can't be too strong or too flexible or too tall or whatever it may be. Um, but I tend to look at it more as what is the person's game? What are we trying to do here? And maybe if they're not very tall, I go, okay, well, we know that your attributes are that you are very strong, um, you've got really good lungs, but maybe you're not so tall. So the triangle, using that as an example, maybe isn't for you. But man, we're going to work on your Kimura. We're going to work on your guillotine. You're going to get really good at those things. And it helps to kind of figure out that sort of like you said, the roadmap of, take this road, not that road, because this one's all tore up, but that one was just, that one works well for you. But I think generally the the closer you can have to all three of those bars, same level, great. If the A is higher than the rest of them, awesome. But um, yeah, generally, you'd like to see them all raised together.
So we talked at the beginning. I mentioned at the onset, and you talked about Mike at UFAI. Can you just talk about how you? So you're in Binghamton, New York. How do you get connected with Mike, and then through Subconscious out in LA?
Yeah, yeah. So, like I said, I had gotten started in 2008 with my former instructor, Adam LeClaire. Um, and he was at the time, I think technically he was a purple belt. He had trained with under Roy Harris and Joe Morera out in California, and he was in town here. His wife was working; she works in healthcare. She's a nurse, I think, and so he was offering classes at the gym that I was going to already. I was going. It was a place called Shamrock, um, and so I was already going to that gym, and then I saw that they were doing, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. And to be honest, I mean, it's kind of funny this, but to be honest, I thought it was like included in the gym membership. So my first couple of classes, yeah, I went to them, and hey, thanks, and left. And maybe a week or two later, I was talking with my former coach Adam, and he goes, "Hey, I gotta square up with you. We'll figure out how much you owe." And I was like, I thought it was no, it's not included. But I liked it so much that I was like, okay, cool, yeah, I'll pay above and beyond all whatever we need to do. And so I had gotten started with that in '08, and then Adam, his wife had taken a job up in Vermont, and so he had to leave the area. So a few of us, super stubborn, maybe we'll call it three blind mice or three, you can go Three Musketeers if you want to be optimistic about it, but three of us that really wanted to continue training, kind of stuck together. And we had this sort of club where it's just the three of us were just learning stuff and bouncing it off of each other. And occasionally Adam would come down once or twice a year for seminars. And so for the longest time, probably a good 6 years or so, it was just a club of a few guys, a handful. We'd gain and lose a few here and there. Um, we had maybe a dozen at the most at one point. And after about 10 years of training, um, unfortunately, so things were pretty turbulent for Adam and his life and his family's health, and things were going on there, and so he was never really able to get an affiliation with anybody. And without the affiliation, you can't be promoted. He was a purple belt, and with his prior affiliation, he could only promote up to two belts below him, which was white. Um, so I was, after about 10 years, I was a 10-year white belt.
Wow.
And so I told Adam in, the nicest way I could. I was like, listen, I really appreciate everything. I think I've been loyal to a fault. Um, I've got to reaffiliate. I've got to go somewhere. And he, to his credit, had literally just within like the week, affiliated with UFAI. And so he had recommended to me that maybe I go up there, meet Mike, check out the place, see what they think. And I was open to it. I was looking for an affiliation, and I really appreciated his recommendation. I still, I look up to him. So went up there to Vermont with the intention of affiliating, and Mike, I was there for maybe about an hour, 2 hours, and he put me through it. He said, show me this, show me that. we'll roll, we'll do this, and he we got done, and he was like, dude, there's no, you're not a white belt. So he gave me a blue belt right there. Got some pictures, me and my blue belt, and then affiliated with him, stayed with him for a while, and then a few months later went up there for promotions and got my purple belt. Um, because, like I said, I've been doing it 10 years. I was a blue
Right.
belt for maybe 4 months. Went, white, blue, purple, and then that was, I want to say, 2016, 2017. And then from then till this last June was when I got my black belt. Had been with Mike, and I think honestly, it's aside from beginning jujitsu, the best choice I've made um, so far in my jujitsu career. And with Subconscious, how I got affiliated with them, it's just I affiliated with Mike. Mike is affiliated with Subconscious.
Yep.
At the time was the Jiu-Jitsu Brotherhood,
Yep.
um, and yeah, so now it's Subconscious, UFAI, and then my school.
So I'm guessing that for 10 years you weren't a spazzy white belt for 10 years. So that wore off. That's
That's debatable, but listen, looking at some of my videos from 2016, now looking at them, I go, what the hell was I, what was I doing? But at the time, of course, I had learned quite a bit, and was doing better than I thought. But it also wasn't a very big club, and I kind of, like I said, we all raised together, and
yep.
yeah, it was good to get that affiliation, and now, like I said, I don't think I've made a better decision other than beginning jujitsu uh, with all
I
this.
think your path kind of speaks to Mike is very well known for saying keep showing up, and
Hmm.
the fact that a lot of people 3, 4, 5, 6 years into white belt are going to be like, what's the point, and bail.
Hmm. Right.
And I think that keep showing up mentality you clearly possess because you kept showing up,
Hmm.
even just to work out with each other and try to better yourself. And that's I think that's a testament to that
Hmm.
philosophy for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I'm definitely preaching to the choir, maybe even the director of the choir, when I say that stubbornness is important. I went through a lot of things are broken and sickness and all that, and I actually in 2013 they found a hemorrhage in my brain about the size of a golf ball, and doctor told me, he said, no more jujitsu, not happening. You can't ride your motorcycle, and you can't train jujitsu. So I sold my motorcycle that month, and I said, I'm not going to not train jujitsu. Sorry. Um, Stuck with it, and like I said, I know I'm preaching to the choir, with what you had to go through, and yeah, that stubbornness. That's even if, and I think this kind of went back to again my speech when I got my black belt. I was telling him, I said, even if you feel like you don't have that vigilance, that diligence, that maybe even motivation, whatever it takes to keep returning, at the very least have stubbornness. At least be stubborn. Always, show up when you can, even if I mean, maybe it sounds bad to say, but the doctors are telling me not to, and I was like, nah, I'm not gonna. I'm gonna keep going. And I think that's important.
Mike and I had this exact conversation about his doctor has been like, you should probably wait 6 weeks, and he goes back after 2, and
Right.
and all this stuff. My doctor telling me I shouldn't even go to class, and I'm in the back with a mask on. So it's like
Right.
there's something,
Right.
and your story, and there's something profound. And part of this is kind of what this podcast is like, what the heck is it that
Hmm.
that latches onto all of us? Those of us who stick with it, that makes us like ignore or not listen fully to our doctors and
Hmm.
hang in there for 10 years at white belt and all of these things that I, I don't like. It is so, I think it is such a profound thing, and I haven't really been able to put my finger on it to
Yeah.
say, oh, it's this. And so I don't know if you have the magic answer, but
I wish I did. I wish I did. I think it really is a combination of a lot of things. It's that stress inoculation that I was talking about before. It's one of the things that I guarantee you've heard it a bunch of times, you probably even on this podcast, but it's one of those things where no matter how bad your day was, you go to jujitsu, you leave that place. I don't know that there's even been a single day, even the days that there was one day I broke my toe or it's just, I don't think there's been a single day that I went to jujitsu and I left there wishing that I hadn't gone. Um,
Yep.
there are many days like that at the gym.
Right.
There were a few of those days, even with Krav Maga and the other ones. But with Jiu-Jitsu, there's just something about it. I think it's in itself can be a form of therapy. Um, like I said, you have the worst day, you go there, you test yourself, you work out, you work up a sweat, you physically test yourself, you push yourself to limits. Um, you have the interaction with other people who are also going through that. There's a bit of that maybe trauma bonding, but in a good way. Um, there's such a combination of so many of those things that it's really hard to put your finger on just any one of them. Why can't it be all of them? There's something about it that just makes me want to keep coming back for more. Even now that I own a business, where
And I think on the flip side of that is I can't think of a time where I've shown up and left in a worse mood than when I got there. Like,
right,
and I think that goes for a lot of people. Even when you're starting out and you leave there just like, what just happened? I don't know. I don't know
yeah,
anything, and that was awful. But you still leave there in a better place than when you got there, which is just so bizarre.
oh yeah, yeah, and there are of course many days where you go out there and you're just not performing to the best of your ability, and you know it. And that ride home with the music off is is it can be
Have
a
you been
tough
in my
one.
car?
Yeah, yeah, right. But it's not in a I wish I didn't do that kind of way. It's more
Right.
of a I think when I did this and he stepped around and took my back to choke me out, maybe next time what I could it's it goes back to that whole analytical thing of
I call that
kind
the
of
autopsy.
hindsight. There you go. Yeah, yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. On my way home, it's usually the autopsy of like, okay, how did I get there?
right.
What can I do? What can I do? What can I do to not end up in that same outcome? Or even
Mhm.
even when you're driving home and you had a great roll, and I still autopsy like, okay, I want to make sure I can repeat that. What did I do that worked?
Oh yeah.
What did they do that helped me get so it? I'm with you on the analytical piece.
Mhm.
It's so chess like. It's just
Right.
super cool.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, I totally agree. It's you can never think too much about it, I don't think. There's because there's always more and there's always things that I don't know, and I don't know that I don't know them because I've not seen them yet,
Right.
or they've not been shown to me.
Right.
And it's a discovery. It's like a treasure hunt that there's a treasure at the end, but man, is that good luck finding it, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my sources tell me that you got dojo stormed at some point. Is that is is
Yeah.
that is that a story you can tell us? Or
Well, I'll tell as much as I feel I can. So, one of the things, and I don't remember exactly the words that he used, but I listened to your episode with Gavin Wageman, and he had said something along the lines of try not to complain, condemn, or something else. Um, and that really cemented for me the idea that nobody looks better when they're trying to speak badly about somebody else.
yep.
Um, what ended up happening with that was that I, so I've been training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu this whole time, but for a while there, because there was no affiliation, because with my old coach there was no affiliation. He had also worked on what's called Shokido Combat Jiu-Jitsu, which is a kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of different things with a gentleman that he had trained with years and years ago. His name was Paul Lincoln Hunt. And so we had been training officially combat jiu-jitsu, Shokido combat jiu-jitsu. And I actually got, it's right there. I don't know if you can see it on the far left. There's a black belt that says Shokido right on it. I was wearing that belt one of the days that this overzealous blue belt decided to storm the place where I was renting space, um, saying that I was claiming to be a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and I was, teaching them falsely under this false, guise. And I told him very specifically many times, um, that no, I am not a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. I have a lot of respect for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts, and this is combat Jiu-Jitsu. And it just so happened that they don't make combat Jiu-Jitsu gis, so we were
Right.
using our
Right.
BJJ gis, but the
Right.
belts were different. Unfortunately, one of my former students, he had gotten promoted to blue belt in Shokido from my former instructor. But my former instructor did not bring down a belt with him. So basically, it was just buy your own belts. You can wear it. You have my permission. And unfortunately, he had purchased a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu belt. And when
Wow.
he went to another school to open mat cross train thing, um, he was wearing that belt. And I think a couple of people,
Yep.
it kind of irked them, and I guess rightfully so. And whenever Adam would come down for seminars, we were training Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I would wear my white belt. Um, but the former owner of the gym where I was uh, uh, renting that space from, he meant well, but he had a sign made for the side of the building that said karate, which is what he trained, personal training, and Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, or BRAZ Jiu Jitsu.
Yep.
And so between that and me wearing a black belt and us wearing our Brazilian Jiu Jitsu gis, this guy
Yep.
thought that I was pretending to be what I was not. And so he came in, and what really kind of bothered me about it was he came in with a few of his guys that he was training with at the time, and they were trying to hide that they, had their phone like this, that they were doing like a Facebook Live.
Hmm.
Um, Video went viral. It was a whole thing, and people who actually trained jujitsu immediately they were like, "No, he told you. He told you directly that he is not a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt." But people who didn't train it, they love smelling
Oh
that blood in
yeah.
the water.
Yeah.
They love putting labels on things, and so I
Yep.
was the bad guy, and I was immediately guilty. Um, and uh, so I think the other thing that really um, did not help me at all was the day before. No, one or 2 days before, I had gotten a tattoo right here on my chest. Um, and so clearly I wasn't going to be rolling that day. I was wearing like a tank top. Uh,
Yep.
I guess they call them wife beaters, even though I feel like that's not what we should be calling them anymore. But I was wearing a tank top and I was looking kind of sloppy, and I walked in, they came in, and these guys were trading out here, and I was just sitting over there, hunched over, trying not to let that, touch the
Yep.
tattoo. And so they came in with video. I was looking sloppy, all the things, the stars aligned so that he
Right.
looked better than, he probably should
Everything.
have.
Everything that a viral video needs.
Exactly, exactly,
Yeah.
yes. And
Yeah.
so I was doing my best to, like, I was understanding of his perspective and why he would think that, and I was trying to be very passive and not too defensive, because there's really no way to respond to something like that people won't feel that you are guilty or guilty conscience or something like that.
Yep.
So I was trying my best to be patient with him, um, and until he started really escalating. I said, "All right, you got to go. You're out of here. And yeah, so that was a situation that I was, having to deal with. But like I said, I understand his perspective, but his approach was poor. It was not good. Uh, but yeah, I mean, he's still training, but certainly not here. Yeah.
As long as he's still on the mats, that's good.
Right.
As
Exactly.
long as everybody's still on the mats, that's good. That's
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Um, so in an effort to encourage either veterans or somebody who's, about to separate or retire from the military, is there a message? Is there a like a call to action, something that you think maybe they're like, oh, I'm considering it. But they haven't made up their mind. Is there something you would say to them to encourage them to start training?
yeah, I think that it sounds cliche, but it's true that really the most difficult part of this entire process is walking in the door the first time. It's really it's intimidating.
Yeah.
It's something that you're walking into something that you really don't understand at all. You don't know what the environment's going to be like, and that's that's a big part of why I really try to focus on keeping, a friendly and welcoming atmosphere. I tell people all the time, if when you walk into my gym, the first thing you see isn't a smile and a handshake, then well, you're not at my gym. I don't know where you are, because like
Right.
it's a welcoming environment. But I think for those who really want to try it and start out with it, they sort of need to understand that the anxiety is the worst part. Um, you've got to get through the door the first time, and then after that, once you realize that it's a welcoming, friendly environment where everyone wants to help everybody, it makes it so much easier. And it doesn't hurt that most places, myself included, will have at least a trial class, if not a trial week. So you're not monetarily really risking anything. And now I have a fundamentals class once a week that is really aimed at that, to get people who have never done it before, they don't know anything about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that some of them feel intimidated about just coming right into the adult class, hitting the ground running, and
Yep.
like I'm gonna really feel like I'm getting beaten up here or whatever it may be. Um, so yeah, I think what I would say to them is that it is, if you let it be, it is life changing, um, and almost entirely for the better has been my experience. Um, but you got to get through the door the first time. Once you get through the door the first time, you'll realize that you know, this is, what was I so worried about? What was I
Yep.
so, what was my concern? Um, because yeah, I think once you make it in the first time, it's, if you don't have a good experience your first day, I would be incredibly surprised. Because like I said, I don't know that there's been a single day that I left here thinking I don't want to do this. Um,
Yeah. I
yeah.
think I had this conversation with somebody at camp, and this old, I don't know how old it is, but this saying came up where it's, somebody was shown white through black and said, which one of these belts is the hardest one to get? And of course, people just starting out are like, oh, it's the black belt. And it's like,
Right.
well, the white belt, because you got to get off your couch and get in the door. And
Right.
I think that's there's a lot of truth to that, because I think that it's a, what is it, like 1% of the world or something trains, like
Mhm.
it's
It's
so it
not a
is,
lot.
getting in the door is definitely one of the harder steps. So that's
Yeah. Totally.
yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
And then keep showing up.
Right. Right. Then that's where the stubbornness kicks in. Like I said,
Right.
if it's not optimism, it's not motivation. Just let it be stubbornness, and you'll keep showing
I like that.
up.
You mentioned adult class, fundamentals class. What other
Mhm.
what other programs or things coming up do you have at 607 Grappling?
So I also have a youth class that I do from ages 7 to 15. Um, and then we have a female-only self-defense, jiu-jitsu-focused self-defense that we do once a month. It's the second Saturday of every month, um, and that's for that tends to be quite a bit more scenario-driven. It really is more of a self-defense driven thing. It's not really the sport of jiu-jitsu necessarily. And we also do Muay Thai on Mondays and Fridays. We do that as well. But that I think I don't know if you want this part in or not, but I think that female only class. One of the main reasons why I started that was there was quite a bit of trauma when I was a kid. That
Mm.
um, long story short, somebody that is very, very close to me. I don't know that I should say specifically, but somebody very, very close to me. She was assaulted, and so was my younger sibling. Um,
Mm.
and I was only 12 at the time. Even if I did know jujitsu, there's nothing I really could have done. But
Right.
that has been a major driving factor for me just learning to fight to begin with, whether it be jiu-jitsu or Krav Maga or whatever it was. And I think that giving back that female only class really is full circle. I think for me, in that that's a big part of why I got started, was that I want to feel like I could protect people if I have to. I don't care about protecting myself.
Right.
I've always kind of just had the that service driven. I want to help other people. Um, so yeah, that female only class. It's only once a month, but I feel like that's the one that's the most, uh, I think maybe profound uh, for me
Yep.
anyway. That really matters the most of everything that we do.
Is there, so obviously your motivation for doing that comes from this exposure to trauma and this
Mhm.
affiliation with that trauma. Is there Are there anything specifically that you're doing to make that like trauma informed, or to, if you like, if you have somebody coming in for the women's class who maybe has some trauma, obviously
Mhm.
there's things that can be triggering, and there's other I'm
Mhm.
assuming, like, I don't know if you have a female instructor, but like,
Mhm.
are there any specific things that you're doing that are uh, trauma informed, or in that
Yeah,
vein?
yeah, definitely. So the instructor for that class, she is my senior student. She's a four stripe purple belt. Um, and so she does that. She teaches that class. I'm here. I'm behind the counter,
Yep.
just in case
Right.
she has any questions or anything, or she wants anything to be elaborated upon. But yeah, so I'm almost entirely out of view from them. I don't want to really be a part
Right.
of it unless she needs me as the male figure to thrash her around or whatever it may be
Right.
to make a point.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but yeah, and to be honest, I mean, it may seem like blowing smoke a little bit, but this podcast has helped me with some of that, because I think I want to say it was one of your last episodes. Not sure really when this was coming out, but there was a gentleman from black belt from Alaska who had
Yep.
made some suggestions about the trauma informed stuff and things that he does. And I'm like, that's really great, because during the female only course, we always say in the very beginning, well, Christy always says in the very beginning, she says, this this place here, this is a safe space for you. If you feel you need to leave the mats, I completely understand. If something we're showing is triggering, you can head out if you need. There's other rooms over here. Um, and we definitely do our best to make sure that they know that
Yeah.
if you're feeling a certain response to this, it's totally okay. You can go sit down. We're not judging. We want everyone to feel, I don't know if comfortable is the right word, because it's an uncomfortable thing that we're doing, um, but we don't want people to feel triggered or threatened, or any type of
Re-traumatized.
PTSD.
Yeah.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do my best to not really go out there. That's all Christy. um,
Yeah.
but yeah, on top of that, we always have the speech beforehand. If anything we're doing is triggering for you, please let us know. We can either tweak it, or if you need to leave the area, that's totally fine. I completely understand. But that really is a big part of
Even having a plan, right? Like,
it. Right.
I've talked to other people just out traveling and stuff where they don't really have. Well, it's like, oh, we have a female specific class, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, well, do you do anything different? Well, no, and it's so. I mean, I think, I don't know what the perfect trauma informed class looks like, but
Mm-hmm.
like, you clearly have a lot of, you've put a lot of thought into that, and I think any step that direction is a step in the right direction. So that's
Hmm.
commendable for sure that you're thinking about that stuff
Right.
and flexible.
Yeah,
That's great.
and also, I mean, even with the regular classes now, I mean, like I was saying, this podcast has honestly helped me with some of those, getting some ideas out there about that gentleman I was talking about before. He had mentioned the simplest thing of, if you're out here rolling and you leave the mat, put your thumb up. Let us know you're feeling okay.
Yeah.
Because if you're not, one of many people, if not myself, will come and talk to you. Hey, you doing all right? Everything okay? Just making
Yeah.
sure, just kind of touching base. Um, I also have pretty hefty discounts for law enforcement, first responders, military veterans, um, and with the hopes that a lot of like-minded individuals, people who work in law enforcement or whatever it may be, can work together because they tend to. I've got several police that that come here, and they prefer to work together. I think, as compared to with the civilians, because
Yep.
it might be partially ego driven in that they're like, I'm a cop and I don't want this random 16-year
Right.
old stoner, you know,
To
beating
thrash
me
me.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but also even with that, it's I understand that job is a very difficult job, and I'm sure you know better than most that can be a very difficult job, and it's important that there's that brotherhood, there's that camaraderie even amongst them as a subgroup of what we're doing here. Um, and particularly with them is where I started really with that concept of, if your role didn't go the way you wanted, just let us know you're okay. You're just a little bit frustrated, but that's fine.
Yeah.
And that it's
Yeah.
not something actually
Prepare for
traumatizing.
your autopsy on the ride home.
Right, right, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, turn off the music; it helps you see better. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So I end every episode with asking, what people's twisted remedies are. Obviously, jujitsu is a big one for you. Is there any other things you do to help yourself stay on track, stay well?
um, that is a good question.
That's why it's last.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there is a group here in town, a combat veterans group, that I see at least once a month, for for our meetings and stuff. But um, this just this past week, I'm not sure again when this is coming out, but just this past week was Veterans Day, and so we're typically pretty active right around Veterans Day. We go to nursing homes sometimes and hang out with their veterans. We have dinners with them, sit down, talk with them, just war stories, just whatever makes them feel a little better. Um, we do parades. I was in the Veterans Day parade, helping handing out candy and stuff, and that
Nice.
really is also, I think, very helpful for me. Just that, again, that sort of acts of service,
Yep.
um,
That
getting out
connection.
of my own mind and helping to connect to others. Yeah, yeah. That's and of course
Awesome.
therapy. I actually had literally an hour before we started this interview. I ended my therapy session. I do every 2 weeks. I do have a therapy session. Um, so I've got that as well.
Yep. It's getting there. Like it took me a while to get there, but
Mm-hmm.
boy, finding the right therapist and the right modality
Mm-hmm.
was life changing. A lot like jujitsu. It was, it's just
Mm-hmm.
one of those things like, oh, I need this, and this is, it's actually okay to do this.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
And it's important you mentioned that too about jujitsu is that sometimes you can go to a school and be like, this isn't for me. This
right,
isn't right. And I can only hope that people are, if they go to a gym, they have a bad experience. Let's say, hypothetically, with the guy that dojo stormed me about 10 years ago, let's say they go to his gym and they're like, I don't feel welcome here. Um, Hopefully they keep trying, right? Because
yeah,
there are places like my gym where people are welcomed and friendly and all that. And hopefully it helps them to get into jujitsu and really understand the benefits you know, that it has, that it creates, and not just give up because you had one bad experience. and there shouldn't
Right.
really be any bad experiences, but there are some gyms out there like that. Um,
Yep.
so you gotta keep trying.
Yep. Absolutely.
And the same thing with therapists, like you said. Sometimes it just doesn't mesh.
The right one and the wrong one can be frustrating, and
Yeah.
it's easy to say I'm done with therapy, but it's
Mhm.
it's so important to find the right school and the right therapist for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, this has been awesome. I appreciate you coming on. Anything else you want to plug or throw out there before we wrap up?
Not particularly. No, no. I think we covered a decent amount, but definitely thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate it. I know you've got some pretty big guests coming up. I heard you. I don't want to spoil anything, but I've heard you got some pretty big guests coming up. I talked to Mike last week when I was up there, and I think I'll see you next month. I'm going up for the promotions
Yes. Yeah.
next month. So
Yeah. I'll be there.
yeah,
Yep. Awesome, Kyle. Thank you so much for coming on, and I'll chat with you when I see you in December.
yeah. Anytime. I appreciate it.